Good evening, my friends. Evangelist Joey Bellmore here once again for another Sign of the Times report, and we're going to cover a lot of stuff in regards to the Earth changes in this particular report. We're going to do an extensive update on the LA gas leak. We've got a nuclear leak to report on down at Indian Point Nuclear Facility, sinkholes. We're going to talk about volcanic activity and of course, the animal die-offs continue worldwide. We're going to do a Hosea 4:3 prophecy update in regards to that. And we're going to start off by talking about one of the signs that Jesus said would be one of the signs preceding his second coming. And that is the earthquakes in diverse places. So let's start with this piece here from CBC News talking about how this earthquake swarm has rattled a New Brunswick village, and it actually broke windows, as we see here. And it mentions in the piece here that a swarm of small earthquakes is again rattling residents in the southwestern New Brunswick village of McAdam. Officially, 9 earthquakes hit the area on Monday night alone, coming on the heels of more than 23 tremors recorded since February the 1st. So that's 23 earthquakes in less than 2 weeks, because this piece was actually released on February the 11th. So that's a 10-day or 11-day period. And 23 earthquakes in a place that's probably slightly rare for significant seismic activity to even occur in the first place. And it goes on to say here that Mayor Frank Carroll estimates there were 20 to 30 small quakes on Monday night, with many of them not picked up by monitoring equipment located about 95 kilometers away in St. George. One of them registered 3.3 in magnitude. It goes on to say here that there were no injuries that were reported, and damage has been very minor. So that was a good thing. There are quotes here saying that, according to reports, some people kind of describe it as a bomb going off. And actually, recently we had an earthquake where I live, which is also very rare, and it did feel like a pop and a crack. I thought a truck ran into our building here, but anyway, so we see this seismic activity is not exclusive to many of the areas around the globe that typically make these reports. But here we see that another swarm hits over in McAdam in New Brunswick. A powerful 6.5 magnitude earthquake was also recorded that struck eastern Indonesia late on Friday, February the 12th. There were no tsunami warnings that were immediately issued, according to the United States seismologists. And it does mention that there were no reports of damage or casualties, so that's a good thing. And another swarm to tell you about here, as a series of earthquakes were recorded under Mount Rainier. And it says here that a series of earthquakes were recorded under the mountain Thursday morning. The Pacific Northwest Seismic Network reports a little swarm of quakes, as they called it. And it says that it shook under the mountain for about 20 minutes. And in this next piece, we see Oklahoma is still rattling, as we see that it was hit with the state's third largest earthquake in the history. And it says here 5.1 was the magnitude, and it was in Fairview, as it goes on to talk a little more about it. Here in the piece, it says that 2 large earthquakes, including the third largest in Oklahoma history, shook near Fairview on Saturday morning. And I don't think there were any reports of damage. And it goes on to say here, quake registered at a magnitude 5.1 and was recorded northwest of Fairview. And it talks about a 3.9 magnitude aftershock that followed just 10 minutes after the initial 5.1. There was also several people injured and a cliff that actually collapsed into the sea on New Zealand's South Island after what was called a severe magnitude 5.9 earthquake struck close to Christchurch, which is still rebuilding following a devastating tremor back in 2011, as this piece talks about. And if you remember that earthquake, back in 2011. I believe it was a 6.5, if I'm not mistaken, but we see more significant seismic activity happening over there in the Christchurch area. There was also a magnitude 4.1 earthquake that struck in the Pu'uo volcano in Hawaii, and I probably really mispronounced that. I apologize, but goes on to say in the piece here that the earthquake struck in the middle of the southern lava fields off the Pu'uo caldera, which reaches all the way from the peak of the volcano into the ocean several miles away. And this is part of the greater Kilauea volcanic complex that's located on the Big Island. So we see some activity over there as well. And as we usually do, we'll take a live look in here on the latest earthquakes around the world. And I'm over here on the European Mediterranean Seismological Center. And as we have a look here, we'll only take a look at the significant ones. There was a 6.0 magnitude earthquake over in Tonga. And we also see a 5.1 magnitude earthquake in southern Greece. 6.2 over in Auckland, New Zealand. And we see that Oklahoma continues to experience some activity here with a 3.1. And that's about all in regards to the significant quakes, but three significant ones there: a 6.0 in Tonga, a 5.1 in southern Greece, and a 6.2 in the Auckland Islands in New Zealand. And in Kitchener, Ontario, Canada, we'll go for our next piece here, talking about a huge sinkhole that swallowed a truck as we transition into sinkholes that are going on around the world now as well. And as we see here, it says 2 men are lucky to be uninjured after driving their truck into a 2-meter deep sinkhole in Kitchener, Ontario, Wednesday morning. It says the men were able to escape the vehicle, which was submerged in water. 2 tow trucks were able to retrieve it from the crater around 10:30 a.m. I want to play this footage for you here. As you can see, the truck being lifted out of the sinkhole. A pretty decent sized sinkhole as well, and as it happened, obviously there was a bursted water main or something that was spraying water and everything, so wanted to share that. I'll link you guys up with the piece. Meanwhile, in Chatham County, there was a sinkhole blocking a road, and apparently this thing is growing, and the fix is still 2 months away. As it says, the sinkhole that has forced the closure of a road in Chatham County for 3 weeks is still growing. And State Department of Transportation officials said it could be another 2.5 months before the road is fixed. And it says that according to the DOT officials, old pipes underneath Leicester Road, which crosses Jordan Lake near Pittsburgh, gave way on January the 18th. At first, creating a sinkhole that took up about half of one lane. And now this thing has apparently grown. And it says that by Monday, the sinkhole had grown significantly, taking up much of the 2-lane road. And you can see that there is a picture of this thing here. In this next piece, we're told about a sinkhole that actually drained a pond at a golf course in the Villages over in Florida. As it says here, sinkhole drains retention pond at Pimlico Executive Golf Course. And it says here, a sinkhole has drained a retention pond at this executive golf course. Sam Whartonby of District Property Management confirmed Thursday morning that a sinkhole about 8 feet across caused the pond to drain. And it says that work to fill in the sinkhole will be taking place, but they didn't express an immediate timeline, and apparently birds were making the most of the situation, feasting on the fish that were left at the bottom of the pond. Moving along to some other news here, we see that apparently over in Gaza, there's a mysterious bubbling desert sand over there, and I'm going to go ahead and play this footage for you. It really is rather peculiar, to say the least. And I wanted to include it and, of course, link you guys up to it so you can check it out yourself. But it says here that this mysterious phenomenon is just out of this world and apparently still unexplained by experts. And so here's the footage of this thing here. And I'm going to kill the audio because it's just people talking, but take a look at that. That's pretty crazy. That makes me think of some sort of emission of gas, or maybe, I don't know, something similar to volcanic activity on just a more minor scale. But definitely pretty crazy stuff, as there's apparently bubbling sand over there in Gaza. Another thing I usually look at in these reports is significant volcanic activity, and we're seeing an acceleration, or an uptick, if you will, of volcanicity so far in 2016. And this piece alludes to that, as it says here, how the earth changes are intensifying, and how the volcanoes across the globe, as it says here, go ballistic as 2016 arrives. And in the piece, it goes on to talk about just some of the recent significant eruptions, like in Mexico, and at the Kilauea volcano in Hawaii, Mount Egon in Indonesia, San Miguel in El Salvador, the Momotombo in Nicaragua, Mount Macaturin in the Philippines, the Popocatépetl volcano in Mexico, the Turrialba volcano over in Costa Rica. And so it talks about a lot of these major volcanoes, and we'll look at a few other reports here as well, including this piece here talking about the Fuego volcano and how it spewed ash onto nearby towns over in Guatemala. As it says here, a restive volcano near Guatemala's capital spewed ash on nearby towns Wednesday, including on a colonial-era city popular with tourists, officials said. The overnight eruption of the Fuego volcano, whose name means fire in Spanish, sent ash billowing up to 5 kilometers or 3 miles into the sky, in rivers of lava up to 2 kilometers long, according to Guatemala's Volcanology Institute. And it mentions how light tremors were also felt up to 25 kilometers away. And before we move on to some other news, I'll just do a live look in here at the active volcanoes around the world. And I'm over here on volcanodiscovery.com, a really cool site if you're into volcanoes. Shows you all the volcanoes of the world that are known. And you can learn all about them, and you can see them all here. And basically the color coding is the ones that are marked in yellow are currently experiencing unrest. The ones that are orange colored are actually experiencing minor volcanic activity and on a warning for larger eruptions, and the ones that are coded in red are actually experiencing a significant eruption, full-out eruption, if you will. And so, you know, if I were to zoom in, I mean, you'd get the picture a lot more as you see all the active volcanoes around the world, and obviously specifically around the Ring of Fire here around the Pacific Ocean. But you can click on each individual volcano, learn about it, and you know, go ahead and you know, I don't know. It could be helpful for people doing projects or anything like that, or people who just want to know and have a look at it and keep an eye out, because this is going to be one of the significant signs of the end times as we move forward, and the seismic and geologic activity overall just continues to intensify as we move further and further into these times, which are just so prophetic that the Word of God speaks of in the Bible. And so I'll link you guys up to that, but you clearly see that lots of volcanic activity around the world, and it has accelerated thus far in 2016 significantly. There was also an Arctic blast that descended upon much of the United States as well, but also here in Canada, especially central and eastern Canada, and shattered records in many areas in terms of cold temperatures, falling to upward almost minus 45 degrees Celsius in some locations. In fact, going into the weekend, they were warning of life-threatening conditions because of the cold in some places in the U.S. And apparently this polar vortex that's blasting the Northeast right now is the coldest air in a decade, according to a report. And in this piece here, we see that in upstate New York, a mountain, they've reached minus 114 with the wind chill at its summit. And that is just insane. It's just insanely cold. And it says here, while New York City had its coldest start to Valentine's Day in 100 years on Sunday, it would seem balmy compared with the wicked wind chill at upstate Whiteface Mountain. As temperatures dropped across the Northeast from the blast of a polar vortex, the wind chill at Whiteface near Lake Placid made it feel like a body and mind-numbing minus 114 degrees late Saturday and into Sunday. That is pretty cold, my friends. And so I'll link you up with that piece, as well as apparently, according to this report, Whiteface Mountain in New York State, by recording this minus 114, was actually colder than Antarctica at that point. Meanwhile, 3 tropical cyclones apparently formed almost simultaneously, according to this report, in the southern hemisphere. And it says here, Dia was born in the Indian Ocean, whereas 11 and Tatiana formed in the Pacific Ocean. And you can see them here. Apparently they all formed simultaneously. And I'd like to know, or do maybe a bit of research and find out how many times something like this has occurred. But I'll go ahead and link you guys up with this report as 3 tropical cyclones form at the same time down in the southern hemisphere. 1 in the Indian Ocean and 2 over in the Pacific. Other signs of the times that the Word of God tells us about is drought and famine, and we're seeing that become more and more frequent in many areas around the world. And here we see that the UN has come out and warned of famine in the Yemeni city of Taiz as Saudi airstrikes with banned weapons, might I add, continue against the impoverished country on almost a daily basis. So we're going to see a famine caused by many different ways, wars, droughts, and what have you. I'm also going to link you guys up to this video from the Voice of America talking about how 2/3 of the world faces a water shortage. It says here, 4 billion people, or about 2 out of every 3 on the planet, do not have enough water to meet their basic needs. That is far greater than previously thought, according to a new study that presents a more accurate picture of the problem. And so here we see 2/3 of the world facing a water shortage. Meanwhile, the United Nations has warned that around 49 million people in southern Africa could be affected by a massive drought down there. And it says here, It is estimated that 40 plus million rural people and 9 million poor urban people who live in drought-affected areas could be exposed, the United Nations World Food Program said in a report on Monday. And another piece here talking about this drought apparently caused by El Nino, and that is threatening southern Africa. And in this piece, it talks about how this is one of the worst in over 50 years. And it talks about how it has caused intense drought in southern Africa. And that's going to have a devastating impact on the region's food security for a long time. And it mentions that across large parts of Zimbabwe, Malawi, Zambia, South Africa, Mozambique, Botswana, and Madagascar, the rainfall season has so far been the driest in the last 35 years, according to the Food and Agricultural Organization, and what they released in their statements. And it says here, the region's intense drought has expanded and strengthened since the earliest stages of the 2015-16 agricultural season, driven by one of the strongest El Nino events of the last half century. And from El Nino, we'll go to La Nina, which is the opposite of El Nino, apparently. And it says here that this La Nina is expected in the next few months for the first time since 2012. And it says here, even as El Nino weather phenomenon continues to impact global temperatures and crops, its counterpart, La Nina, is increasingly expected to emerge in the coming months for the first time in 4 years. The return of La Nina, Spanish for the girl, is characterized by unusually cold ocean temperatures, is possible later this year. Meanwhile, a panel of British and American researchers speaking at the annual meeting of the American Association for the Advancement of Science in Washington, D.C., will present updated research revealing how extreme events which affect the food system are increasingly likely to occur, resulting in food shocks. And food shocks have the potential to wreak havoc on food markets, commodity exports, and families around the world. And it says here, because distant regions are increasingly connected by global markets, the threat of extreme events occurring in different bread baskets simultaneously is especially concerning. Moving along to this piece here from the European Space Agency, and apparently Bolivia's vanishing lake Pupo has fully evaporated. And I reported on this a few videos back on how the lake was diminishing at a rapid pace, and here we see this report coming out on Monday talking about how the thing is fully evaporated now. And it says here, monitoring Earth's surface every day, the European Space Agency's Proba V mini satellite has had a ringside seat as the second largest lake in Bolivia gradually dried up. Lake Pupo has now been declared fully evaporated. The three 100-meter resolution Proba V images shown here were acquired on the 27th of April 2014 and the 20th of July 2015 and then the 22nd of January 2016 respectively. So you see 2014, 2015, and 2016 significantly decreasing there. And it says here that the great fear here is that any refilling might take many years if it occurs at all. And in the meantime, local fishermen are left without livelihoods, and the lake ecosystem is extremely vulnerable. And speaking of ecosystems, I'll link you up to this piece talking about how frightening findings when they look at all the facts are foretelling ills for the ecosystems from all the different pollutants that humans are putting out there. And I'm not talking about the carbon lie. I'm talking about just straight up pollution that's going in when it's whether it's nuclear radiation leaks, oil spills, sewage being dumped or nuclear materials, hazardous waste being disposed of in the waters. These type of things are foretelling ills for the world's ecosystems, which is also another sign of the times, as you know, this fallen creation that we live on at this time is only deteriorating, and it's mostly because of our own doing. And the Word of God prophesies this in the last days. And speaking of ecosystems, we'll move on to this piece here, talking about how the Condamine River's mysterious bubbling is intensifying. And this is down in Queensland, Australia, if I'm not mistaken. And this is a report from ABC News. And earlier in the video, I showed you bubbling sand in the desert over in Gaza. And here we see bubbling in a river. And apparently this is intensifying. As it says here, landholders in Queensland are calling on the state government to find the cause of methane gas bubbling in a major river, which they say has intensified in recent months. The so-called methane seeps in the Condamine River near Chinchilla were reported back in 2012, triggering a series of investigations. But the government has told the ABC that it does not have sufficient information to identify the cause of the seeps. Meanwhile, heavy rain affected the northern part of the Caribbean island of Hispaniola between the 9th and 11th of February, and this resulted in flooding in parts of both the Dominican Republic and Haiti, as these areas had 216 millimeters or 8 inches of rain in just 24 hours. Meanwhile, down in Papua New Guinea, there were 3 days of heavy rain that caused flooding and landslides, and now there's several dead, and bridges have been destroyed in the midst of all this down there. There was also flooding due to torrential rains in Honduras at the Isla de la Bahia. Moving along to meteor sightings now. This one was reported on Thursday in San Diego, and this is a piece from the San Diego Tribune. Apparently there was no video footage of this, but many people called in with reports, as more than 110 witnesses reported a large blue-green fireball over Southern California on February the 11th. This is according to the American Meteor Society and their report that was released. And here you can see the areas where all the reports came from. And there was also a meteor fireball that was seen on Valentine's Day streaking over the northeastern U.S. as reports came in. And here's a video footage from the Dover region, as we see here. And it looks like 2 objects enter there, but pretty good shot of it there. So I'll link you guys up with that. In other news, protesters gathered in the village of Clinton Saturday in BC, British Columbia's interior to stop the dumping of the toxic sewage sludge in the Big Bar Lake area that is being dumped on their farmland, apparently. And I want to move on now to the LA methane gas blowout that's been going on, and do a little brief update on that. This is a piece actually from CNN talking about the kids of Porter Ranch, as we see in the headline, who live in an area nearby, and how this spewing methane rocked their sense of safety. And the piece goes on to talk about how Cooper Stutler's teacher told his 2nd grade class to put their shirts over their noses as they crossed the playground to get snacks. She didn't want them to breathe the gas, Cooper says. It smelled like rotten eggs. So he tried to inhale less air, hoping it wouldn't get into his lungs. When I was smelling it, I would try to cup my hands over my mouth and try to breathe less. Breathe the air less, 4th grader Mia Dukamijian says. I've had headaches and stomach aches. And, it's well documented, the health implications that this has had over there. And I've looked at that extensively in previous reports. And this is kind of just going over it briefly in this piece that I'll link you up with, along with everything else in the description box below as usual. But it says there are some of the youngest victims of the biggest gas leak in California history. The Aliso Canyon gas leak has driven at least 10,000 people from their homes in Porter Ranch, California, according to a Los Angeles city councilman. And many people who are residents there, as we've seen in previous reports, have actually chosen to just relocate altogether after this gas leak. And, even Los Angeles has had school districts move almost 2,000 students out of 2 schools nearby. So this thing just continues to progress. And this is a piece from Energy News talking about how they may have actually lost control entirely of the entire field that's involved in this LA gas disaster, and it's coming up everywhere, as we'll see in some of these reports here. And there's a quote here saying that we learned there's many other leaks now, according to an attorney. And officials are quoted as saying that there's a loud sound of gas escaping heard half a mile away, apparently. And they're calling it a mini Chernobyl. And according to the Associated Press, the leak is out of control, and the amount released is seriously underestimated. And, you can be linked up to these reports and quotes here in this piece. There's a link up to the actual Porter Ranch Town Hall meeting on this thing, and talking about how, this is the largest natural gas leak in history, especially for that area. And it links you up to the town hall meeting, as well as all these other reports here that are linked up from all the multiple agencies. But we see that this thing is, of course, the mainstream media won't tell you that, but it's out of control over there. And this is just another sign of the times as chaos begins to unfold on the planet here. Another report here in regards to the LA gas blowout, and here we see that the wildlife are disappearing around this massive LA gas disaster, and according to the residents, it's completely quiet. Birds, butterflies, rabbits, coyotes are all missing, and all the fish in the pond are found dead. All of this is gone, and a resident is quoted as saying that it makes me wonder how bad it really is. And then it talks about an animal with worst blood ever seen by a doctor, as it's been documented that a lot of the pets are even getting sick, not to mention the children. And this links you up to news broadcasts and other reports from the area that verify what the heading talks about here. And in this last piece, I'm going to link you up with, in regards to the LA situation. Here we see experts are saying that formaldehyde is now spewing from this massive LA gas leak, and how it's very dangerous for the public as methane is turning into embalming fluid, and it can make your body start digesting itself. Company knows this is happening and should warn us. Obviously, they don't want you to know about it, and just like anything else, it gets covered up in the lamestream media. And so I'll link you up to this as well, which is also linked up to many different reports, and of course different video footage of the meetings and whatnot. But that situation is far from under control and still poses a very dangerous risk to the public. And so from the massive LA gas leak down there in California to the toxic water supply plaguing Flint, Michigan, and other areas now in the U.S., as we'll see. But I've reported on this extensively, how there was lead poisoning and how the government in the northern U.S. state of Michigan is scrambling to help resolve the toxic water crisis in the city of Flint, where lead has been found in the bloodstreams of more than 200 children, according to reports. And, this is actually causing brain damage and other significant health impacts. So I'll link you up with that. And as I mentioned, there's actually contaminated water in multiple areas in the U.S. right now that's actually coming to light. And this piece talks a little bit about that, as it goes on to talk about some of the different areas, as I've reported on. As it says here, since national attention has turned to Flint, information from other cities is now coming to light, showing similar problems. If you remember, I reported on Sebring, Ohio, which is one city where residents have been warned not to drink the water because, again, same thing as in Flint, Michigan, elevated lead levels over there. And it was recently revealed that there are high levels of lead in water over in Jackson, Mississippi as well. Even though the results of the tests were available 6 months ago for that area, it's just coming out now. And so I presume there are other areas that will come to light in the coming days and weeks as people start to get more vigilant in regards to the state of their water supply. But I wanted to link you guys up with that and show that there are contaminated water supplies popping up now in multiple regions in the United States. And so we go from massive gas leaks to poison water supplies in multiple U.S. cities to radiation leaks reported at a U.S. nuclear plant. As it says here, apparently alarming levels of radioactivity have been detected at 65,000% above normal. According to the governor, he says he's deeply concerned and says it's a significant failure. Officials are worried about the health of the public. The extent and duration of the release are unclear, and apparently radiation experts are being sent in. So I'll go ahead, I'll link you up to this piece, which links you up to reports from CNN, the New York Daily News, News 12, the Associated Press, and all kinds of other news outlets, and 4 different news broadcasts on this thing. And apparently this is at Indian Point Nuclear Facility in New York. And that's actually not too far from where I live. And apparently at the Indian Point Nuclear Power Plant located on the Hudson River in Buchanan, New York, new measurements were taken, and they show levels of radioactive tritium that are 80% higher than those what were reported last week. And the plant operator insists the spill is not dangerous, as state officials have called for a safety probe. And so we see here that according to these measurements, this thing's actually 80% worse than originally reported. In fact, in this report from the 9th, so about 6 days ago now, it's talking about, according to officials, there was a fire/explosion reported over at this nuclear facility, and an emergency alert has been declared, as this was an unexpected power decrease. This in the reactor happened after this fire or explosion, and the emergency response facilities are staffed, and it's being classified as an abnormal event with potential to impact plant equipment or public health and safety now. And so there has been a state of emergency, or an emergency alert declared at the nuclear power plant. And so I'll link you up to this piece that talks a little more about it and links you up to news coverage and different reports on this situation. And this last piece I'll link you up with in regards to the nuclear leak over at Indian Point Nuclear Facility is this piece here, originally from CBS, and I quote, it says, radiation leak is getting worse at the nuclear plant near New York City. Levels increase over 120,000%, almost 15 million PCIL, whatever that means. And the governor is quoted as saying that it's extremely disconcerting. And according to an expert, he says, I don't think they know where it's coming from. So that's pretty serious. It says that the radioactive antimony is now being detected over there. And so I'll link you up to some of these reports here that are all linked up in this piece. There's a Fox News report and what have you, so you can get an idea of how serious this situation is. And it's apparently getting worse. And it says here that the groundwater below the Indian Point Power Plant in Buchanan, New York is about 740 times the amount allowed in drinking water. So this thing could potentially get out of hand here if it isn't already. And so we've got nuclear leaks, we've got poison water supplies, we've got massive gas leaks or gas blowouts over in California, not to mention everything else that's been going on, such as earthquakes and the sinkholes and the volcanic activity. We talked about the drought and famine, the vulnerable ecosystems, and and we'll go on. We have a few other things to cover before we close here in just a second. Moving along now, I want to do a brief update on the whole Zika virus freakout, paranoia scare that they've got going on. And regardless of what's really behind this, it's worth reporting on its spread. And to me, I think it's just probably a biologically engineered virus released on the public. Again, it's going to bring in contracts and money and funding to Big Pharma for a vaccine. And it goes a lot deeper than that. But, I'm not here to talk about that. I'm just going to report some of these findings as we see here, that China has confirmed their first case of the Zika virus, as China has confirmed its first case of the Zika virus in a man who had recently traveled to South America, the official Xinhua news agency said. And so we see now China has confirmed their first. Similarly, over in Russia, they've registered their first case of a person infected with the Zika virus as well. As it says here, Russia's consumer safety watchdog said on Monday the country had registered its first case of a person infected with the Zika virus, an unnamed female who had been on holiday in the Dominican Republic. In Venezuela, the president Nicolas Maduro said on Thursday that 3 people had died of complications linked to the mosquito-borne Zika virus, and that suspected cases of Zika had risen to 5,221. Brazil said on Thursday that 3 people who died last year had the Zika virus, although authorities could not confirm that Zika alone was responsible for their deaths. Meanwhile, in this piece from the Jerusalem Post, we see that after the Ebola scare over there in Sierra Leone, the women have been warned about Zika virus now. As it says, Sierra Leone's last known Ebola case was released from the hospital this week, but authorities have yet to locate about 40 contacts who may be carrying the virus still. So while Ebola is still the country's biggest concern, Euphooma Festus Omo Obi, the country director of the Marie Stopes Family Planning Organization, said Sierra Leone should be ready for the Zika virus too. And it goes on to talk about how Zika itself is not life-threatening, but the latest outbreak originating in Brazil shows it might lead to microcephaly, a birth defect that leaves babies with smaller than normal heads. Now they're linking this Zika to microcephaly, but if you actually look, microcephaly was being reported in Brazil long before Zika had arrived. So many people aren't agreeing with that correlation. However, that's what they're saying. And apparently there are more than 5,000 pregnant women in Colombia that have the Zika virus, according to government reports. And here we see it says that more than 5,000 pregnant Colombian women are infected with the mosquito-borne Zika virus, the country's National Health Institute said on Saturday, as the disease continues its rapid spread across the Americas. There are 31,555 cases of the disease in Colombia, the National Health Institute said in an epidemiology bulletin, among them 5,013 pregnant women. The disease has been linked to microcephaly, a condition marked by babies being born with an abnormally small head size that can result in developmental problems. And again, it's not confirmed like they say that Zika is linked to microcephaly, but they've really been hyping that up in the media. And I wanted to link you up with this piece here from Voice of America News, talking about how the Zika in Latin America, yellow fever in Africa, and dengue across the tropics, and these three diseases are all on the rise, and all three are carried by one mosquito, the Aedes aegypti. And it says here, then why are school children raising and releasing these mosquitoes in Townsville, Australia, in a state that regularly suffers dengue outbreaks? To be honest, it sounded a little counterproductive, said Townsville science teacher Michael Brown. But Brown and his students are part of a new strategy to fight dengue and other mosquito-borne diseases. Apparently, the insect eggs they take home are infected with harmless bacteria called Wolbachia. The bacteria live inside the mosquito's cells and, in ways that are not entirely clear, block the insects from transmitting viruses, including dengue and chikungunya and Zika. And so they're releasing infected mosquitoes that apparently can help combat these diseases. The Zika virus, according to this report, could be in semen more than 2 months after infection, as it was previously reported, according to the UK health officials. So Zika may remain in semen for a long time after infection. And we know, as I reported on, that apparently this can be transmitted sexually. And of course, the race is on for a vaccine for Zika, and apparently the first human trials could be ready within months. As we see, 20 companies are at various stages of development now, apparently, as the commercial test for the Zika virus could be just weeks away, according to this particular report here, as it says here that currently there are 10 biotech companies and 10 other companies that are at various stages of developing a test for the virus, which is currently sweeping its way through the Americas, and what some would call potentially biological warfare, perhaps. Certainly can't rule it out when you research stuff like Agenda 21 and hear the words out of the mouth of people like Bill Gates, who want to control the population through vaccination programs. You could hear that out of his own mouth if you just look it up. You can see him at his own news conference saying that. And one of the things that I always update in these videos is the worldwide animal die-offs as they continue to increase. And this is in line with the Hosea 4:3 prophecy, as it says, therefore shall the land mourn, and everyone that dwelleth therein shall languish, with the beasts of the field, and with the fowls of heaven. Yea, the fishes of the sea also shall be taken away. And we're seeing this on unprecedented scale. And it's been ongoing the last few years, but just in 2016, and we're only a month and a couple weeks in, and there have already been 82 plus known and recorded mass animal die-offs or mass death events in 36 countries or territories around the world. And we'll start with this piece here, talking about a mass death of species has been found around the Fukushima nuclear plant. According to the government, they seem to have disappeared. There's little or no reproductive success. It is evident that the biota around the the power plant has been affected since the nuclear accident. And so different things like these nuclear accidents at Fukushima, which is might be the greatest natural disaster in human history in regards to nuclear leak, definitely dwarfs that of Chernobyl. And we see it's causing a mass death of species around the area, not to mention contaminating the Pacific Ocean in immense ways. In other news, there were thousands of dead fish that washed up in the waters of New Caledonia, and that's what we see in this report here. Another piece I've got pulled up here in Google Translate is from Montevideo in Uruguay, as masses of dead fish washed up on the beaches over in this region here, and the authorities are trying to determine what happened and whether or not it was due to water quality. There were also 5,800 chickens killed due to the bird flu in Tainan, Taiwan. Meanwhile, in this piece from the Netherlands, I've got it pulled up here in Google Translate as well, and it's talking about hundreds of dead fish that were found in the waters of Oosterhout in the Netherlands. And here's a piece from ABC News talking about how thousands of dead fish are washing up on the beaches down in Fiji, according to this report. As it says here, there's a warning that extreme temperatures are causing fish to die from heat stress, with thousands washing up on beaches in several countries across the Pacific. Another article I'll link you guys up with here is this report talking about dozens of monkeys that are apparently dying off, and how it's a mystery over in the forests of Nicaragua. As it mentions here, in recent months, around 40 howler monkeys have been found dead or dying in the tropical rainforests of Nicaragua. The animals have all had relatively full stomachs and no obvious signs of trauma. Experts fear there may be more cases that have not been reported. And one of the experts, who's a PhD, was quoted as saying that wild animals die off all the time, but it is really unusual to see this many deaths in such a short time with no apparent reason. And this doctor went on to say that he says, and I quote, "I have never seen anything like this." And so they're still looking into it to see what the cause of these monkey die-offs are. But here we see more events lining up with the Hosea 4:3 prophecy. Another fish die-off here, as hundreds of dead fish washed up on beaches over in Mauritius. And that's what this report talks about here that I've got pulled up in Google Translate. It says hundreds of dead fish strewn on Sunday the beaches of Point aux Sables and Baie des Ames and the Salinas Mauritius. Authorities suspect that the kingfish, mullet, eel, tuna, and cobblers have been poisoned, and he has asked the public not to consume them. So there's warnings about that they are poisonous, and apparently the types of fish that washed up are kingfish, mullet, eel, and tuna, and also cobblers. Meanwhile, the whale die-offs continue around the world as another dead cetacean was found on the Indian coast, and so we see that another whale has washed up over there, and it talks about here how days after dead whales were found near the coast in Odisha's Ganyam and the Kendrapara locale, another cadaver of whale was found from the coast close to Matagoan in the Brahmagiri locale on Tuesday morning. Another die-off here as the body of a minke whale washed up at the Sheringham beach in the UK. As it says, the 20-foot-long minke whale, first spotted at the Salt House last month, came to rest over a wooden groin at Sheringham. And it talks about how the badly decomposed body, which had been gradually rolling down the coast, came to rest on Tuesday evening and is apparently going to be removed. Another dead sea whale found in Malaysia. There was also a 28-foot-long dead whale found in Ratnagiri, India. In this piece, a dead whale calf was found off Samana in the Dominican Republic, and apparently it was a stillborn. Meanwhile, another whale carcass had to be removed from Bantry Bay down in South Africa. And this last piece here I'm going to finish off with talks about how researchers have calculated that approximately 150,000 penguins have died after being landlocked by a colossal iceberg over in Antarctica. And so I'll link you up with this piece as well. And to me, penguins are some of the cutest creatures on this earth. However, 150,000 of them have perished after they were trapped by a massive iceberg. And so the animal die-offs continue in relation to the Hosea 4:3 prophecy, as we'll continue to watch, and we will continue to discern the times as we move along here. And now, excuse me, I'm doing a little something here on the side, but I'll link you guys up with everything that I showed you. And my friends, time is shorter than most people realize. Understand today that the Bible says that your life is nothing but a vapor in the wind that appears for a short time and then vanishes away. And God says in Deuteronomy 30:19, "Behold, I call heaven and earth to record against you this day. I put before you blessing and cursing, life and death. Choose life, that you and your seed may live." In Joshua 24:15, we're told to choose this day whom you will serve. So I urge you today to repent from your sins, to believe the gospel, get into the scriptures, get born again by putting your faith in Jesus Christ and accessing the powerful grace of God that will empower your life by His Holy Spirit. I pray that you do this today, that you seek Him with all your heart, because if you do that, His Word promises that you will find Him. Until next time, my friends, I'm Evangelist Joey Bellmore, signing off. Godspeed and much love in Jesus Christ's mighty name. Good evening, my friends. Evangelist Joey Bellmore here once again for another Sign of the Times report, and we're going to cover a lot of stuff in regards to the Earth changes. In this particular report, we're going to do an extensive update on the LA gas leak. We've got a nuclear leak to report on down at Indian Point Nuclear Facility, sinkholes. We're going to talk about volcanic activity, and of course, the animal die-offs continue worldwide. We're going to do a Hosea 4:3 prophecy update in regards to that. And we're going to start off by talking about one of the signs that Jesus said would be one of the signs preceding His second coming. And that is the earthquakes in diverse places. So let's start with this piece here from CBC News talking about how this earthquake swarm has rattled a New Brunswick village, and it actually broke windows, as we see aftershock that followed just 10 minutes after the initial 5.1. There was also several people injured and a cliff that actually collapsed into the sea on New Zealand's South Island after what was called a severe magnitude 5.9 earthquake struck close to Christchurch, which is still rebuilding following a devastating tremor back in 2011, as this piece talks about. And if you remember that earthquake, back in 2011. I believe it was a 6.5, if I'm not mistaken, but we see more significant seismic activity happening over there in the Christchurch area. There was also a magnitude 4.1 earthquake that struck in the Pu'uo volcano in Hawaii, and I probably really mispronounced that. I apologize, but goes on to say in the piece here that the earthquake struck in the middle of the southern lava fields off the Pu'uo caldera, which reaches all the way from the peak of the volcano into the ocean several miles away here. And it mentions in the piece here that a swarm of small earthquakes is again rattling residents in the southwestern New Brunswick village of McAdam. Officially, 9 earthquakes hit the area on Monday night alone, coming on the heels of more than 23 tremors recorded since February the 1st. So that's 23 earthquakes in less than 2 weeks, because this piece was actually released on February the 11th. So that's a 10-day or 11-day period, and 23 earthquakes in a place that's probably slightly rare for significant seismic activity to even occur in the first place. And it goes on to say here that Mayor Frank Carroll estimates there were 20 to 30 small quakes on Monday night, with many of them not picked up by monitoring equipment located about 95 kilometers away in St. George. One of them registered 3.3 in magnitude. It goes on to say here that there were no injuries that were reported, and damage has been very minor. So that was a good thing. There are quotes here saying that, according to reports, some people kind of describe it as a bomb going off. And actually, recently we had an earthquake where I live, which is also very rare, and it did feel like a pop and a crack. I thought a truck ran into our building here, but anyway, so we see this seismic activity is not exclusive to many of the areas around the globe that typically make these reports, but here we see that another swarm hits over in McAdam in New Brunswick. A powerful 6.5 magnitude earthquake was also recorded that struck eastern Indonesia late on Friday, February the 12th. There were no tsunami warnings that were immediately issued, according to the United States seismologists. And it does mention that there were no reports of damage or casualties, so that's a good thing. And another swarm to tell you about here, as a series of earthquakes were recorded under Mount Rainier. And it says here that a series of earthquakes were recorded under the mountain Thursday morning. The Pacific Northwest Seismic Network reports a little swarm of quakes, as they called it, and it says that it shook under the mountain for about 20 minutes. And in this next piece, we see Oklahoma is still rattling, as we see that it was hit with the state's third largest earthquake in the history. And it says here 5.1 was the magnitude, and it was in Fairview, as it goes on to talk a little more about it. Here in the piece, it says that 2 large earthquakes, including the third largest in Oklahoma history, shook near Fairview on Saturday morning. And I don't think there were any reports of damage. And it goes on to say here, quake registered at a magnitude 5.1 and was recorded northwest of Fairview, and it talks about a 3.9 magnitude